What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the second album by rock band blink-182. Basically, this project is called Dude Ranch, and it came out in the late spring of 1997. Now, the thing about this particular album is Blink-182 is starting to blow up, particularly in the thing about this particular album, Dude Ranch, is the fact that Blink-182 was starting to blow up, particularly in Australia, as far as that kind of went. And they just had some hit singles on here, but this is kind of like their album before the album. This album's kind of like their album before the album, kind of similar to Limp Bizkit's $3 Bill Y'all and stuff like that. And also, I would say Smash Mouth's 1997, Fushu Mang, some stuff like that. There's a number of bands that just were particularly kind of bubbling in 1997 and had their breakout year in 1999, and Blink 182 is no exception. But I do think there's a lot of underground appeal about Dude Ranch, but I kind of feel like this album was not terrifically kind of spectacular as far as I kind of went. It was kind of lackluster in a lot of ways. I think apart from the singles, there's just not a lot highly to kind of speak of. I kind of feel like the songwriting is kind of half baked, and there's just not a lot of overall hits to really back this band up apart from like a couple singles. Really, this is a pretty underground album. Apart from Josie and Damn It, those were like the only two real songs that charted that heavily as far as that kind of went. And even for the most part, Josie didn't really chart in the United States, as more in Australia and things like that. So it's just particularly Damn It that kind of led this. It was just particularly Damn It that led this band to success back in 97, 98, as far as that kind of went, until Enema of the State came out. And that was definitely a pretty hit album. I reviewed that back in early 2023. So I've reviewed a number of Blink 182 projects. I'm going to get to some other ones as far as that kind of goes. I'm definitely going to get to some more of these as far as that kind of goes. But this one, I mean, this one is not like a foul album. It's just kind of the concept that it just doesn't have a lot going for it, just in terms of like the half-baked songwriting. I just would have to say it's kind of it's kind of too bad about that, because I feel like this is kind of boisterous. I do feel like this is kind of like some rougher, kind of more hungry kind of songwriting as far as that kind of happens. It's just the fact that it's just not very compelling. I'd have to say I definitely like the band work in certain senses. It just kind of has a little bit of edginess. It just really feels like a bunch of frat party and this kind of more homecoming type romps. It just kind of feels like a bunch of frat party and late summer homecoming type romps as far as it kind of happens. Just really amongst like August, September, October. Just really amongst August, September, October, times like that as far as that kind of particularly kind of happens. I mean, it's definitely a summer album, I would have to say, but it's just kind of more late summer, I would feel like, as far as that kind of goes. But it's just kind of the pitch that it's just more relaxed. I definitely feel like the energy on Enema of the State was just a lot higher pitched and just a lot more crazy. I would feel like songs like All the Small Things and What's My Age Again, some of those type ones, they just had a lot more crossover appeal. I feel like Damn It's definitely a pretty good song, but it's just a lot more laid back, I would say. This one's just probably like the album title, Dude Ranch. It's just a lot more kind of summery, laid back, just in a more kind of malaise kind of sense, just kind of more particular, just kickback. But I do like the concept that some of this does have like some of this does have a decent amount of charm to be able to have like some decent frat parties, things like that, just kind of beer pong, those type things, just kind of kick back, just beer sipping, swilling, some of those type tunes, and just house parties as far as that kind of goes. But it's just kind of in a mild sense. This is not a huge, this is not like a super huge quality album, but I would have to say it does enough to be able to say that the singles are worth it. There's just not a lot of good album cuts, I'd have to say. So we'll go ahead and talk about the singles to get towards that. Basically, the first single is Apple Shampoo, and this only came out in Australia, but I would still have to say it's a pretty good song. This is basically like a basic this song is like a basic outing venue and frat commotion of a song. I'd have to say it's a good midday kickback of a song, definitely, I would feel like, and it just gives excitement for some good times, I would have to say. So this is a pretty good one. This one, Apple Shampoo, is pretty similar. Apple Shampoo is pretty similar to Josie and Pathetic, I'd have to say. Definitely good pitches as far as that kind of goes. This Apple Shampoo has a pretty good steadfast kind of kickback and just overall basic type bop as far as that kind of happens. It's just a real nice one to kind of have this. Just a little bit hair raising, but not quite full blown crazy, but just enough to kind of have like some decent, commotion as far as that kind of pitch kind of happens. Just a real nice kind of steadfast type one that's just kind of middle of the road, mid pace in terms of energy and just overall rampantness, but still a pretty nice one. But it's just one of the few hit songs on this particular album, I'd have to say. But the second single is Damn It. This is the most popular. The second single is Damn It, and this is the most popular song according to Spotify. It has over 200 million plays, I'd have to say. So that's a pretty good bop to kind of get that. This one definitely feels like a de facto kind of skateboarding song, I'd have to say. I really like the concept of that particular pitch as far as that kind of happens. It's just a good carefree. This is just a good carefree summer blaze of a tune, I'd have to say, and it's just a good out and about kind of song. So I definitely appreciate this one. This one just really feels like something that would be in like a Tony Hawk. This one just really feels like something that would be in a Tony Hawk video game, something like that. Just a good pitch to kind of get just within that concept. Just a real good skateboarding type song and punk type song. Just a real de facto song. Pretty good highlight out of the 90s, I'd have to suppose. This is probably one of the bigger 90s punk songs, I'd have to say. Just a real pretty much one of the best songs on the album. This is definitely one of the best songs. I agree with the Spotify plays that this is definitely an excellent song out of not just the 90s, but just out of punk music in general. This is just a really good highlight to have to suppose, and just a pretty good staple for Blink-182 as far as I can have. It's just a real good pitch energy and just distinct riffs on here, that just works pretty heavily, I'd have to suppose. That's a pretty good highlight. So that's a nice one. Then Dick Lips is the third single. This is another highlight off this. I would have to say this is like a mild kind of day breeze pep of a song, I'd have to say. It's just a regular kind of hop and bop day, I'd have to suppose. It's an in motion song, but it's kind of a solid summer kickback fun of a song, I'd have to say. The song definitely feels in motion, but it is some solid summer kickback fun, I'd have to say. So I definitely like the pitch of this one. This one's a little bit more lazy and malaise, I'd have to suppose. This one's just kind of a more standard kind of regular basic kind of day, just mild in energy, just kind of mild in energy, I'd have to suppose. Just the overall pitch of this particular one is probably about a 5 or a 6 in terms of energies. I'd say the overall pitch of Dick Lips is about a 5 or a 6 in energy as far as that kind of happens. It's a real basic and mild type one to kind of have just within that sense, but I still like it. It's that basically a pretty good summer carefree type tune to kind of have, just real nice malaise as far as that kind of happens. It's a real nice kind of basic recreational kind of kickback. I just would have to really have to go about. I just would have to go about and say as far as that kind of happens. It's a real nice one. And then the fourth single is Josie. This is another highlight off this particular album, I would have to suppose. This is like a bubbling kind of, Josie is like a bubbling kind of house party and frat jive of a song, I'd have to say. It's like a reckless kind of day commerce and summer malaise of a song, I would definitely suppose. And it's just good for like a regular romp. So this is another one. I would say both Josie and Pathetic are two similar type songs that have that same sort of pitch and this overall riff vibes as far as that kind of happens. These are just kind of more fraternizing type ones, just for like standard summer kind of socializing kickback, just within that sort of sense where they're kind of revved up a little bit, standard punk type tunes. I do feel like the work they did on Enema of the State is just far better, but I still would have to say this is pretty good for like their early kind of more underground type pitch as far as I can have. It's just some real good house party type fare just within that sense, just real good fraternizing type stuff. Josie and Pathetic are two of the few songs that kind of have that. I mean, I would suppose there are probably other ones, but these are the most distinct ones, I'd have to say. So those are the 4 singles on this particular album. So there's 15 songs in this particular album, and out of those 15, I wound up recommending to you 5. So the 5 songs I recommend would be Damn It, Dick Lips, Josie, Apple Shampoo, and Pathetic. And the only other song I recommend, apart from the 4 singles is just Pathetic. And to talk about Pathetic real quick, this is like a tasks done. Pathetic is kind of a tasks done, kind of hair in the wind, unwind fun of a song, I'd have to say. It's a quick pace kind of summer leisure type song, I definitely would have to suppose. And it's just a revved up song, but it's pretty steadfast. So this is one that kind of has a little bit of excitement about it, I'd have to say, kind of similar to Josie, definitely, but it's just kind of more steadfast type one where it's just not full blown crazy. I kind of feel like they're not really the mosh pit type band, I would have to suppose. Not like there's a problem with their energy or the fact that they're not more mosh heavy, but I just would have to kind of say and stuff that this is basically like some basic about 6-7 in energy type tone as far as that kind of happens. I'd say Josie and Pathetic are the 2 craziest songs on here in terms of that particular pitch. There might be some other ones in terms of the album cuts I don't recommend, but for the most part, most of it's just not that distinct, I'd have to say. Pathetic and Josie are the 2 best songs in terms of like the riveting energy, and then the rest of the singles are just pretty good overall in terms of the pitch that they kind of have. It's just a lot of good fraternizing type social kickback energy, just in like a summer kind of malaise as far as that kind of happens. Just some real good kind of September music. That's basically the concept about this album. Talk about the rest of the songs in this particular album. There's just a lot of these that are just very unnoteworthy and kind of half-baked in terms of the concept and pitch that they kind of have. Just didn't really like the riffage and just the overall kind of more this unkempt kind of atmosphere just as to how they kind of went. I feel like some of these just kind of felt like a more independent kind of label type album as far as it kind of happens. Just didn't really have like the full fleshed out kind of sound as far as like what they would do. A lot of these just didn't have the full fleshed out kind of sound that they would do on Enema of the State and some of the later albums that they kind of had throughout the early 2000s and things like that. I mean, I think some folks would like their kind of underground type pitch, but I just was not seeing the distinction of a lot of these songs. That this was kind of more messy type vibes, and the riffage was just not that compelling. And the riffage was just not as compelling, in my opinion, to kind of get towards that and seeing some of the ones that I could have picked for some further highlights. This is kind of the concept about it. But so in terms of what I'm going to score this album, me recommending 5 songs out of 15 on this particular album, I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 3.5 out of 10. That's really about all the more I can do with it. This is just a pretty lackluster and just overall kind of half-baked project that just didn't have enough compelling songwriting and song execution as far as I kind of have. The social score though, I'm going to give a 5.5 out of 10 because I kind of feel like the social social appeal of this particular album is high just in terms of the singles. It did have some pep just in terms of like some fraternizing and social kind of variety as far as that kind of has, just at least in the singles and just stuff like that in terms of like some house party and just overall kickback, just some overall social kickback, frat parties, summer fairs, just some stuff like that as far as that kind of have. It's just a decent pitch, but this obviously has work to be done as far as that pitch kind of has, just because it's lackluster apart from most of the singles and just like maybe one or two album cuts, I'd have to say. So that's kind of the concept of 5.5 social. In terms of the future, like blink-182 dropped an album somewhere in mid-late 2023. I'd have to say third quarter, something like that, I want to say. So it's kind of the concept about it. We'll have to see as far as some of these kind of go. I do want to review some more blink-182. I'm going to get to like their 2003 album, maybe their 1995 albums. I'm going to get to their 2003 album and maybe their 1995 albums and stuff like that as far as I kind of have. But this is kind of, I mean, this has some great singles on here. Definitely like the kind of skateboarding and punk type edge that this is kind of notable. This is a notable album of the 90s. It's just lackluster just because it doesn't have much going for it at all apart from the singles. That's just kind of the thing about it. But it's decent, but it is kind of dicey in terms of everything else.